In order to customize our components in ReactJS, we make use of properties. Now there are two things which a component can have. The first one being state and the other one is properties. State is something which is internal to component, whereas properties are something which is external to component, and they can be used to further define what exactly that component does. So over here, if we have to relate it, it's something similar to what we have attributes in HTML elements. So for instance, if we have an image tag and it has got an attribute called src, similarly over here we can relate it with that logic, and here our component, as you can see, has got some attributes or properties in this case, which are date and published for this particular courses component. Now in order to define a property, we have a couple of ways. The simplest one is simply define this getDefault property function and return all the attributes with their default values. So if I have to create, let's say, some attribute, some property over here, so I can simply go ahead and define that inside getDefaultProps. So we have date, launch, course, author, and that way the properties can be easily created. Now if you want to override the values of the default, values of any of the properties, you can simply pass it over here. So if I have to change the author, I will simply do it in this fashion. So this will override the author property. There are other ways as well which we can use to define a property, but before doing that, let's run this and see the output in browser. So here I have to make use of that property, so let's use it first and then we'll run it in browser. So author is, and then we have the author property over here. If I run this in browser, you can see that author is skillbakery.com is coming, not the one mentioned in the default. But if I just take this out from here and rerun this, you'll notice the default value is coming up. So this way you can override the default values of a property. The other way to define a property, if you do not want it to be part of the getDefaultProps, then you can simply define it over here and provide it a value. For instance, if I just want to provide another property, let's say total students that this particular course is having as of now. So as of now it's 0, and now if I have to show this value over here, student count, and then we can make use of this dot props dot students. Save this. Now if I run this over here, you can see the student count coming to be 0. So this was another way of defining properties. There's one more way, and if you have too many properties coming up, this might get extended, and you will be finding it difficult to manage it for a component which is going to have more properties that can be put on a single line. So for that, what we can do is, so the other way is by defining a variable called properties and then creating the set of properties that we want, like date and students over here. Then we assign that properties collection to the props property, basically of the component that we have created. Now one thing to notice over here is, if we do it in this fashion, then all the properties that you have defined over here and inside the default props, only those will retain their values which are present over here. So for date and students, we will have the properties default values, and here that will be overwritten by the new date, so it will show the latest date, current date basically. Then students will have its value to 0, but other properties that we have over here, like published, author, and over here course, launch, they all will be not part of it anymore. So if I run this one, you will only see values for date and students coming up. So if I run this now in browser, you can see that for date we are getting the current date, and student count is coming to 0. This is the state, so basically state is having the values from not sold, so that is not a property, so that's why you are seeing this value. But the properties that we have defined are basically present here, date and students. So all you need to do, if you are following this approach, you need to create all these properties over here, and then they will be shown. So if I just have to do that, let's do it. So now everything is proper over here, properties. So now if I run this one in browser, you can see the values are coming up properly. And let's take this one, published as false. And over here we have prop types to bool, that is required. So let's say course is published to string. If I do this, now let's run this. So over here by false we mean it's not published yet. So this way you can show all the properties, and we have seen how we can define properties, assign them the default values. Now there's one more thing. If you have to validate the data type of your property, in that case we make use of prop types, and here whatever property you want to validate, you can just use that. So if it's a boolean, we will say react.proptypes.bool, and if it's required, then we will say is required. So now what will happen is, if I just remove this from here and try to run this with published set to is required, let's open up the console, clear everything out, and run this now. Here you can see you're getting a warning that required property publish was not specified in the courses, and the reason why it is saying so, because we have made it mandatory. So you can simply go ahead and revert back over here. So this way you can ensure that your properties are specified and they have the correct data type with themselves. Now ensure that you are making use of the development version or the unminified version of ReactJS, because if you will use the minified version of ReactJS, this warning will not appear. Now next in line we have is transferring properties. So whenever we are working with multiple components, there may be occasion for sending properties down the structural tree, and this has the benefit of reducing code duplication, obviously. So we have created one more component over here, that is course collection, and this is then making use of the courses component. And here we have introduced a new property called platform, which is actually, if you see, a property in course collection as well. Here we are defining the value to Udemy, and if you take a look at the courses default values, we have here for platform. So if I say platform equals, let's say, SkillBakery. So here what we are doing is we are assigning whatever property we have for platform here for the course collection to the platform property of the courses component. Now in this case, if we have a default value, so now if I do not specify the value over here, obviously the default one will be shown. So if I run this, you see SkillBakery coming up over here. Now if I go back and just undo this, here what we are trying to do is, whenever we have a property in the owner component, so here we have course collection as the owner component, and this is having the platform property, and we are passing the platform property back to the courses platform property. So now this should display Udemy. So if I run this now in browser, you can see that it's showing the value Udemy over here. So this way we can also transfer properties from one component to another.